Good evening. My name is Chad, and I'm one of the pastors here at Faith Bible Church. And it's just such a cool time to get to be with our church family and remember and reflect on this day, 2,000 years ago. A few weeks ago, I did something that is a little bit out of the norm for me, a little bit unusual. I bought a lotto ticket. I'm not sure if I'm actually supposed to admit that on stage, but I did, and I actually bought two. I doubled my efforts, and I bought $2 worth because the lotto was up to $500 million. And I was thinking, I'm going to spend $2, and I'm going to win $500 million. Now, I would take the cash option, okay? So I would probably only end up with $250 million, okay? And I can probably scrape by in life on $250 million, I think. And so I started dreaming about, okay, what am I going to do with $250 million? What kind of house am I going to buy? What kind of new truck am I going to buy? What am I going to buy Jody, my wife? How am I going to take care of my kids? All these thoughts were going through there, and I was even thinking, I'll give some to the church. I'll pay off our debt. I'll pay for the new remodel that we're just started. I'll take care of that. I got $250 million. I started dreaming about all of these things. I had all these dreams about how my life was going to change tonight when my numbers were the winning numbers. Until those dreams were shattered. When not one of my numbers were picked. Not one of them matched the winning numbers. Has there ever been a time where you bought a lotto ticket and you dreamed of what you would do? Or maybe you've had more realistic dreams. Things you really did desire. Things that really mattered in life, but life didn't happen the way that you had dreamed it was supposed to be. I have friends that they have dealt with the fact that they can't have kids, and they really desire that. I have friends that really believed by this point in their life that they would be happily married. That they desire to spend their life with someone. But that just hasn't happened yet. Or maybe you had dreams of being happily married for 50 years. And now you're trying to figure out life after getting divorced or life after your spouse died. What do you do when your hopes and dreams are shattered? How do you handle life when it doesn't go your way? This is the question that some of Jesus' followers were asking this night about 2,000 years ago. Things didn't turn out the way that they had hoped and dreamed. Tonight is about reflection. We will reflect on Jesus tonight by taking the Lord's Supper together and just a little bit later. But also by trying to understand some of the disciples, the emotions that they were feeling this night 2,000 years ago. I really want you to put yourself in the story. Be there. Try to imagine their emotions, their confusion, their anger, their sadness. You were in Jerusalem around the year 33 AD, and you are a follower of Jesus. Maybe you were one of the thousands of people that gathered around the Sea of Galilee, and you watched this little boy walk up and hand some fish and bread to Jesus, and his disciples just kept pulling it out and feeding people. Afterwards, you listened to him teach, and you knew there was something different about him. and you started following him everywhere he went. You ate with him. You laughed with him. You watched him heal people. You watched him encounter the religious leaders. You watched him touch and heal lepers. He even hung out with the tax collectors and sinners like you and me. There was even this one time he raised a guy named Lazarus from the dead. Now that was a wild scene. A little bit scary, but it was awesome. There's something unique about Jesus, and you have come to believe in him as the Messiah. He is the one that the Old Testament prophets talked about. How he is going to rescue you from the Romans. He is going to set the Jewish people free. But then everything changed a few days ago. They arrested him. They spit on him, and they beat him until he was next to dead. They mocked him by putting a crown of thorns on his head because he is the king of the Jews. And they pressed it into his brow, and blood gushed down his face. And then they made him carry his cross. The one that they would eventually hang him on by driving nails in his hands and through his feet. And eventually he would be executed on that cross. This is not what was supposed to happen. Jesus was supposed to rescue us. He was supposed to rescue them, and now he's dead. What happened? The dreams the disciples once had are now shattered. On this night, 2,000 years ago, Jesus was dead. And we're going to read tonight about a couple of followers of Jesus. They were asking the question, why did this happen? This was not the plan. From their perspective, all their hopes and dreams were shattered on that Friday when Jesus died. These guys are walking to a village called Emmaus, discussing all of the events of the weekend. And this story takes place actually on Sunday, 3 days after Jesus died. By this time, Jesus actually was already resurrected. But these two guys couldn't get past their disappointment. And they could only see from their perspective. And while they were walking to Emmaus, the resurrected Jesus actually started walking beside them. And this is where we'll pick up the story. This is in Luke 24, starting in verse 15. These two guys, while they were talking and discussing together, Jesus himself drew near and went with them. But their eyes were kept from recognizing him. And he said to them, "What is this conversation that you are holding with each other as you walk?" And they stood still, looking sad. Well, why were they sad? From their perspective, all their hopes and dreams were shattered. Jesus was dead. Life was not going as they had anticipated. Verse 18. Then one of them, named Cleopas, answered him, "Are you the only visitor to Jerusalem who does not know the things that have happened there in these days?" Which I think is a funny statement. They're talking to Jesus. And he said to them, "What things?" And they said to him, "Concerning Jesus of Nazareth, a man who was a prophet, mighty in deed and word before God and all the people, and how our chief priests and rulers delivered him up to be condemned to death, and they crucified him. But we had hoped that he was the one to redeem Israel." Verse 21 is really important. But we had hoped. Their hope was gone. They had this plan. They had it all worked out in their mind how Jesus was going to redeem them. They were so focused on the crucifixion that they forgot what Jesus had told them about his resurrection. All they could comprehend at this moment is that Jesus was dead. This is the definition of disappointment. When our reality doesn't match our hopes and dreams. When this happens to you, how do you handle it? When you get cancer diagnosis or a loved one dies. When you lose your job, when you get passed up for a promotion. What do we do when our hopes and dreams are shattered? These two guys could not see what, or more literally, who was standing right beside them because of their disappointment. Their perspective of the situation didn't match their hopes and dreams. Let's pick it back up in verse 21. But we had hoped that he was the one to redeem Israel. Yes, and besides all of this, it is now the third day since these things happened. Moreover, some women of our company amazed us. They were at the tomb early in the morning. And when they did not find his body, they came back saying they had even seen a vision of angels who said that he was alive. Some of those who were with us went to the tomb and found it just as the women had said. But him they did not see. And he said to them, O foolish ones, and slow of heart to believe all that the prophets have spoken. Was it not necessary that the Christ should suffer these things and enter into his glory? And beginning with Moses and all the prophets, he interpreted to them in all the scriptures the things concerning himself. So Jesus decided to help them see from a different perspective. He started with Moses and started teaching what the Old Testament prophets said, helping them see that this was the plan the whole time. They just couldn't see it. We don't know exactly what was said. All we know is it started with Moses. Maybe he talked about God's covenant, the Abrahamic covenant. And he talked about in Genesis 12, where he said to Abraham, in you all the families of the earth shall be blessed. And Jesus helped them understand that the cross is what made a way for all the nations to be blessed. Jesus might have quoted from Psalm 22, how they cast lots for my clothing. Or helped them recall from Psalm 22, the words that Jesus spoke from the cross. My God, why have you forsaken me? He helped them see that David was prophesying about the coming king. He probably told them about when Isaiah spoke of the suffering servant in chapter 53, where he said he was pierced for our transgressions. He was crushed for our iniquities. With his wounds we are healed, and he shall bear their iniquities. Jesus helped these two guys understand that he was the sacrifice that Isaiah was talking about. The righteous one had to bear the iniquities, the sins of the world, so they could be counted as righteous. Jesus helped these two men adjust their perspective so they could see what happened just 3 days ago had to be done. Jesus had to die to fulfill prophecies of the coming Messiah. Jesus had to die because the punishment of sin is death. Jesus had to die because sin required an innocent death. This was the plan all along. Jesus had to die. He is the way to the Father. In him is life. As Jesus was explaining these things, they were fascinated and wanted Jesus to stay and eat with them. And this is verse 30. When he was at the table with them, he took the bread and he blessed and broke it and gave it to them. And their eyes were opened and they recognized him, and he vanished from their sight. They said to each other, Did not our hearts burn within us while he talked to us on the road, while he opened to us the scriptures? Well, why didn't they see him until the point where he broke the bread? I think that's an interesting question. Why couldn't they recognize Jesus until that moment? I think it's because they were seeing Jesus' story from their perspective. In verse 32, it says, their hearts started to burn within them as Jesus was explaining the scriptures. So as he explained the Old Testament prophecies, they understood what happened a few days before. And then the bread was broken, and they realized that Jesus was sitting right there in front of them. He is the bread of life that was broken for them. And at that moment, they realized Jesus is alive. And poof, he vanished. And they rose that same hour and they returned to Jerusalem and told everyone what happened and that he is risen indeed. It's fascinating that Jesus had a different perspective of the cross than they did. He's the one that took the punishment, that was beaten and was killed. But Jesus knew what they didn't. It was all a part of God's plan. Jesus saw a different perspective. So Jesus helped change their perspective, and they understood the cross was the way to the Father. They now understood that Jesus had to die. They now understood that this was God's plan. Now they had a different view of that Friday. The cross was not the loss of hope, but it was the basis of hope. Have you ever seen one of those pictures that when you change your view or your perspective or where you stand, it looks like something else? This kind of art is called anamorphosis. This happens because you are seeing it from a different perspective. From one view, it looks like just a jumbled mess. But then as you start to change your view, the picture becomes clearer. Many times, this is what is happening when our lives don't seem to be playing out the way we want them to. We're only seeing the picture from our angle. And sometimes it looks like a jumbled mess. So what do you do when your hopes and dreams are shattered? You pursue life from God's perspective. The cross didn't shatter the hopes and dreams of Jesus. It fulfilled them. He pursued the cross because of his perspective. When you pursue life from Jesus' perspective, you see that he is walking right beside you through difficult times. When you pursue life from Jesus' perspective, it helps you understand that you can get through this difficult season. When you pursue life from Jesus' perspective, it helps you see that God still has a plan for you that you might not even fully understand yet. That's what Jesus did with the guys on the road to Emmaus. He helped them see from his perspective. He helped them see that Jesus had to die. It was a part of the plan. But his death was only one perspective. His bones are not in a box. In fact, since Christ has been raised, it changes everything. Everyone has experienced shattered dreams to some extent or another. Life hasn't turned out quite the way we thought it would. But imagine if we could see those hopes and dreams from God's perspective. We would understand that there is much more to his plan than we can see. That's why we exist as Faith Bible Church, to help people gain a whole different perspective on life. And if you're here tonight, that's what we are all about. Helping people see a different perspective, one that is focused and centered on Jesus.